Green noise is back.
There's also a very real difference between a protected area and any other type of landscape. And what we do at CapeNature is, what opportunities is the landscape giving us?
And is it going to leave a light footprint? If you don't have communities embracing these things and learning about the space that they're around, you've kind of lost the messaging then, you've kind of lost the buy-in of the public.
Hey, welcome to the Green Noise podcast. My name is Dan Corder, live from the absolutely gorgeous CapeNature run and managed Hottentots Holland Nature Reserve. We've got a very special episode. Today we're going to talk about World Heritage Sites, something that CapeNature and their staff know all about, and invisible footprints. And I'm delighted to welcome our two special guests today who both work in exactly this for CapeNature. The first being infrastructure specialist Ramese Mathews. I don't know what an infrastructure specialist is, but I live in Joburg, so I'm hoping you'll visit soon, because we have a lot of infrastructure and none of it works. So maybe Ramese can help us with that. And secondly, Luke Folb, communications officer, whose job it is to get across the values, the stories, the narratives, and the most important points in the knowledge ecosystem about CapeNature and its work. Did I screw up any of that, guys, or are we good to go?
100%.
That was great.
Was it great? I am available for writing your dating profiles. If you need some ghost writing on that, you at home watching. So tell me about World Heritage Sites, what goes into putting them together, and your guys' specific work with World Heritage Sites. I'll start with you, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot goes into it. I mean, it's not just a case of here's the site, we're going to build something and we communicate to the public and, hey, come look at the structure. No, it's more about, I think, telling the story behind it, and it's an all-encompassing, involving process in terms of bringing in the local community, in terms of getting the right authorizations from a legislative point of view, and then also from a building point of view, which Ramese, it does quite good due diligence on that aspect. And then it's about really involving the public and communicating why this is an important site to come to, why it should be protected, and then at the same time, reasoning with them when things go wrong, and there's always public niggles and whatnot, but just explaining the value of a site and why there are certain processes in place. It's really important to get the public buy-in in that respect. Yeah, for sure.
Tell me about some of the sites you've worked on.
We've done a number of projects over the last year and a half. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, if I think of the Demont Nature Reserve, we launched the Demara Trail there last year, and it was a project in terms of whole new signage, the infrastructure that had to go in place, of course, as well. But I'll talk from my perspective in terms of communicating that to the public. It's not just a case of, hey, here's the Demara Trail, come and walk it. It's in terms of working on a whole communications plan for that. And what that also encompasses is getting interpretive signage in place so that we can tell the story holistically as well. And that requires a ton of research. So I work with the South African Heritage Council to get stories about the shipwrecks along the coastline there, to get stories about the indigenous people there. So we've got the fish traps there at Varneskrans in Arniston, which have been there for hundreds of years, more or less. Don't ask me the specifics of the years, but more or less. And that indigenous knowledge is still in practice there today. So when the visitor goes there, you really want them to experience that. But then at the same time with the signage, it's about choosing the right material when you're procuring the signage, right? I mean, the Western Cape is incredible in terms of you've got different ecosystems from the Garden Route through to the West Coast. So not all signage materials are going to be appropriate on each reserve. So it's about procuring the right thing, getting something that's durable, that's lasting, and then leaving a minimal impact on the environment as well. And that is something that as a comms team, we need to think about as well, not just from an infrastructure perspective of, building a deck to camp on or a chalet to sleep in. It's also in terms of, is the signage durable and is it sustainable and is it going to leave a light footprint? So all of these things have to come into our thinking when we think of a comms plan. And then it's about communicating the value to the public and why you should visit. And I always say that, as much as we want international investment in the Western Cape tourism economy, local people need to travel and experience this and realize that this all belongs to us. All of this behind us that we're sitting in today, it all belongs to us. But there's a responsibility to look after it as well.
Ramese, I'm going to get you in a second, but this man is clearly good at the science and strategy of storytelling because I know that every single person listening and watching right now wants to know the story behind the Demara Trail. So just spark note it for me. ChatGPT summary for me very quickly. The shipwrecks and the fish traps, tell me about it.
A lot of that research I wasn't even aware of. And when you start speaking to the experts on these kinds of things, you'll be amazed at the amount of shipwrecks that are actually in that coastline. But we focused on, I think, 3 that were really of importance. One of them is even on the beach there. It's not always accessible. It sometimes gets covered by sand and those kinds of things, but there's been done extensive research. I'm failing to come up with a name now off the top of my head, but yeah, the project was about a year and a bit ago that I did the signage.
So the hiking or the walking,
Yes.
carries you, is it a 1 day, is it 2 day, do you overnight, do you see the shipwrecks and the fish traps? Is there kind of like historical, like heritage reporting signage up when you get to look there?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of that signage comes from these hands and this head, and the words is all my own. So, I ran that project in terms of getting the content together, writing the copy, procuring, getting pictures and the right pictures, getting the local indigenous knowledge in there, speaking to the right people. Then, of course, we get a graphic design and those kinds of things to develop the signage and procurement process to produce the signage and put it up at strategic points. That's in consultation with the reserve management as well, and they can give us pointers about, it's appropriate to put this signage on the shipwrecks here because this is the coastline. It's appropriate to put this on the terrestrial birds here because this is where you're going to see the birds.
Right.
And then in terms of the trail itself, it's an overnight trail, camping on a deck, much like the one we're on here. And then, you can choose to extend that for a second night as well. So you do the hike, get to the overnight point, you're camping, you're brine, you're swimming in the ocean, whatever you fancy. And then the second day is walking into Arniston.
Right.
And once you get there, you can either take the shuttle back to the Dumont, or you can choose to book a second night and stay over at one of the B&Bs there and, have a bit more of a luxe experience after roughing it. So it's fantastic, and really, people should really go and do it. It's a hell of an experience.
That sounds incredible. Now, there's a whole other kind of storytelling and the science of invisible footprints and storytelling involved in the infrastructure development around that, and that's where you do your work, Ramese. So start with, what is an infrastructure specialist in the context of the work that you do for CapeNature?
Well, I think, Dan, sadly, it's not as fancy as it sounds. I think my job is basically, I'm a professional client. So I represent CapeNature and nature conservation in terms of how we get things built. Because, typical building practice, if you're building in the middle of a city, you're building a house, you're building a road, whatever you're doing, it's very, very different in a nature reserve. I think that when we look at these spaces and we look at these landscapes, there are almost 2 types of people. There's that immediate aesthetic benefit that you get. And people say, I come to nature reserves for the tranquility and all of that. And hey, I'm one of those people. But there's also a very real difference between a protected area and any other type of landscape, and that's a legal difference. There are different acts of legislation that governs how we use the space, what we're allowed to do, and then how to do those things. So I think that's a big part of my job, is translating the need of clients or staff to get anything done, and then you've got a big sort of built environment industry and how you filter that into what we can accomplish in a space like this, and obviously retaining all of that feeling of really respecting the landscape,
for sure,
with everything that we do. So so that's the only thing I'm a specialist in, sadly.
That's funny. Okay, so tell me about, maybe for you, the most memorable, hopefully memorable, good experience that you've had to date with CapeNature working on infrastructure development that both satisfies the needs of people who want to visit a reserve, but also the legal requirements and also the natural environment that it finds itself in.
I think, there are a lot to choose from. We've done some amazing projects over the years, and I think I've been very fortunate to work on some, people's rail holidays. I think for me, you get the feedback, and like Kochelberg, where people say, this is where I propose to my wife, or or we see things. It's the deck that we built. I think we did this one like 14 years ago.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And the stories that come out of it as people use these spaces I think that for me is the most encouraging thing. I think that allowing a typical South African to really come in and participate in what nature conservation is, and that's what you're doing when you're entering a space. And I think what Luke is talking about and how we try to educate people, we want to make you aware of the resources that you use, that there's a bit of mindfulness, that even, sitting down or opening a tap, that it's a little bit different from doing it anywhere else.
For sure.
And I think that's just super, super rewarding. And I mean, from across the province, I think we have some really great examples where we've capitalized on amazing natural features. And you're standing there in the beginning and you're kind of like thinking, how do we do this? How do we bring people into this space? And probably the best feeling is, 6 or 7 years later, they're cutting the ribbon and, the CEO's doing the speech and the minister's there.
Amazing.
And I get to see the fruits of that labor. I think that's always the best part for me.
And is there a set of complex, maybe not legal, or maybe legal, but but also added expectations or requirements on developing a built environment when it's a World Heritage Site versus a reserve, or like a more run-of-the-mill nature reserve?
Well, I think it's actually quite consistent, the way we look at it. So, I mean, starting at the bottom, when we look at a reserve, you're looking at what that space is zoned for. So we've got a zonation layer when we're looking at a protected area. And there are certain areas, I mean, I don't want to get too into it, but there are certain areas where we want to keep as natural as possible because maybe it's super sensitive or there are some features there that we really need to protect.
Right.
And then there are other areas that we can develop lightly, and in some areas more than others. But I think the real practice in respecting a landscape is looking at those laws. I mean, we've got the National Environmental Management Act, for instance, which provides all sorts of things. We call them triggers, that trigger an EIA or trigger an authorization or trigger some sort of legal process that we have to follow.
I see.
But it's actually a little bit different in the thinking, I think. I think if you think of, typical urban development, if you were an urban developer and, you were looking at a section, you wanted to do some commerce and you want to put up a mall, it's about where are we going to drop this mall down, and whatever's there is going to get flattened. And in a few years, that's
the mall.
Mall o'clock, man. But in a nature reserve, and what we do at CapeNature is, what opportunities is the landscape giving us?
Right.
Instead of trying to tame nature and make it do what we want,
I see.
We kind of let nature decide.
Right.
So it's leveraging those features, understanding what the landscape does, what its cycles are, and then seeing what we can put there, and then hopefully people use it. People like it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So once all of that extensive years-long work is done, Luke, it's your job to then try and transfer the storytelling. Like you said with the trail earlier, transfer the significance of the space, the history and the heritage of the space. But I don't know if you've noticed, but people don't like reading anymore. And it can often be quite a challenge to try and because a lot of your work is built environment pieces of content, right? In a similar way to something on a newsfeed or whatever. How do you go about trying to make signage, physical storytelling in natural spaces that are significant for the project of, say, the trail that you talked about earlier? How do you make them high information, high entertainment, but also accessible and not overly exclusive?
Yeah, well, I think, we use whatever's available to us. There's a number of communications channels out there now. And if you're not on these things, you're getting left behind. So we're obviously trying to tailor a strategy that suits the channel. We might not do funky, cool stuff on LinkedIn, but we would do it on Instagram and TikTok. You know what I mean? We can use the avenues that are most appropriate. But what we're also finding is that, connectivity is always an issue, understandably, within nature. CapeNature is not the only one who struggles with that aspect of things. But what we're finding is making things a little bit more interactive. So along with that signage, we might do QR codes. It still opens on your browser. So the moment you're back in connectivity, you can read a little bit more and see the kind of visual aspect of these things. I'm also thinking of a project that we just launched last month at Bird Island in Lambert's Bay. I mean, again, totally new interpretive signage, a massive project, and it's brought to life that whole island and the species that live there, and the local community to benefit from it as well. And using these new communicative tools are really interesting. I think the next avenue of exploration would be integrating AI somehow, and that's going going to bring with it its own challenges and new things. I mean, we're already, experimenting with it in terms of writing, in terms of, the kind of content that we're putting out there from the written format. But there might be avenues of exploration from a video perspective, from a sound perspective, and even using platforms like we're doing here today. I mean, this is another avenue and communications channel to use to get the story out there. So I think you have to use everything that's available. If we don't, we fall behind, right?
You're right.
And these things are going to be inevitable in anyways. Kind of like Thanos. It's inevitable. It will happen.
And then I did want to ask, because I particularly love Klipgat down in Stanford. And I particularly love the signage that you guys have up there. It's quite old school, but it's like showing for different eons in that space 3,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. This is what the land looked like. These were the kinds of humans there. This is what they were doing. Even further back in time, these were the kind of animals that were there that are no longer there. There was literally more land there because of less erosion over time. Yeah. I really love that. So when you guys are thinking about the physical, the boards, I guess, the pictures and the words, and choosing with a very, very limited number of words to use, a number of meters of board to put pictures on. What is the thought process that goes into what you actually put on those boards?
Well, I think you have to think of what's most appropriate for the site and what are the big draw cards of that site. So, I mean, it is sometimes difficult. You could have reserves that have like 200 birds, on that thing. So I'm not going to put 200 birds on a board, am I? But you probably think what is the most popular or maybe what is the most vast species on that reserve, and then we're honing on that. I think what's also important of you're mentioning Klipgat there. I think what's really important is community buy-in,
right?
And getting the message around that this is not just a space for species and animals and those kinds of things. People use these spaces and have used these spaces for thousands of years as well. If we go back to Varnen's grounds, like I said about the fish traps, and same thing at Klipgat, if you don't have communities embracing these things and learning about the space that they're around, you've kind of lost the messaging. Then you've kind of lost the buy-in of the public, and so that's another point of view, that the signage has to be accessible. So the language you use has to be accessible. Yes, we need to communicate scientific things in that signage. So the bird's scientific name, or the flower's scientific name, and at the same time, it's also a learning tool, right? I'm putting the IUCN status there. This is endangered. This is critically endangered. And then what does that mean? And the public becomes a custodian of that.
Totally, because you're trying to educate South Africans, normal South Africans like me, on how to behave in that space, how to be respectful, how to conserve in the way that we move through and look after those areas, right?
Yeah,
okay.
And also why it's important, right? I mean, I'm thinking of the African penguin now, right? It's on everyone's lips. It's been well covered in the media. But for local communities, the African penguin is a big income driver. If you think of Stony Point and the fabulous On the Edge restaurant there, the penguin is a big draw card. So for the community, there has to be buying around. We have to look after the species. We can't lose it because there's a big income generator behind it. And and other conservation agencies have the same responsibility. I mean, at Boulders and other penguin colonies. That's why I say, if we don't have the community buy-in, if we're not showing that this is a responsibility of all of us, from a communication perspective, and an advocacy perspective, in terms of, Dan visits the nature reserve today and he goes and tells his family, and hey, you know what, the penguin is important because of this, and we're going to lose it. And,
exactly.
So it's that kind of knock-on effect that I just love about communicating the importance of nature.
Absolutely. Now, Ramese, it sounds like you've got to deal with a lot of people. You got to rely on a lot of people. And that sucks. I was so bad at school when there was a group project. But that is a lot of the work that you have to do in satisfying not only the legal stuff, not only the World Heritage status stuff, not only the tailor-making specific projects for specific environments and people and natural, like the demands of the natural ecosystem within it. How do you go about partnerships to make these effective? Because the other thing that is so deeply frustrating when you're having to go through endless red tape or get the right suppliers or whatever is that things can take a really long time. And we don't want things to take a really long time.
On the one hand, I think you're probably half right. I think managing the people is actually great. I think that because reserves are so special, because everybody loves them, I think it's really a challenge for me to get the team to concentrate. I think about when we I think day 3 on the whale trail is Nutsi cabin, and we replaced that a couple of years back. And we had a very cool design. I worked with a really vibrant design team. They were very responsive to the types of brief that we were putting out there, and also the environment that you have to build in, because even, getting the materials to site, you can't get trucks on the roads, and so there's a lot of fine planning and things. And eventually they got the frames up, and I was late for the site meeting because, roads and things. And then, it's a 4x4 track, and I was just, all by myself, just looking at the time and hammering down there. And I get there, and the team's waiting for me to start the meeting. And at this point, that building's a shell. It's on post footings. It's a timber frame, and we're having the meeting inside. And the architect that I work with is a great guy, but he was very firm because I think he was a little bit annoyed. And he goes through the agenda. It's quite a procedural thing. Point 1, and nobody's saying anything, and he keeps looking down at the page. And when he looks up, it's because the entire team is staring out into this bay,
Wow.
this lagoon that Nutsi is placed in. And
Wow.
there's a mom southern right, and she's just had a baby.
Wow.
And the baby is playing with the dolphins right there. And it's you can reach out and touch them. And I'm like, guys, I know we have things to do. I know it's a long drive. But let's just take a minute here, And I think that when you work with people who also understand that, it's really great. It's really great, and I think we really take the time to do a good job. But I think the time is what annoys a lot of people, and I think that. For me, what's important is getting people to understand the context of what we're trying to achieve. And sometimes when things break, due to a fire or a flood, it's unplanned. We don't have the finance even to get it fixed. But even then, the methodology is so careful that to the public, it's just this bridge has been broken for 2 years. What are these people doing? This is typical wasting taxpayers' time. But what we're actually doing is being very, very careful about putting that bit of infrastructure back. Yeah.
Do you ever think about Luke when you're doing your plans?
I think a lot of the time it's like Vito Corleone, look what they've done to my boy when Luke starts slapping signs. Right? No, I kid. I think we work very closely. I think what I do is I spend a lot of time on site. There's a lot of time planning, and that does take years. So I think that the rest of the team knows what's coming up. But I think for me, it's a lot more intimate. I'm there all the time, and we're teasing this thing out of the earth, and then I get to hand over to people that understand messaging and understand how to get people interested in it. So that's really great. I think there's a handover. We test products together. There's a lot of feedback. I like to bring colleagues on when we're nearly done. Just in case there's anything else you want, or something else that we can do. And that's really great. It's so lovely working on a team where people understand the goal, and everybody's got a stake in it. And then you really do get the new thinking, and that's really great. Knowing that I don't have to think about everything.
Yes.
That there are people that I can rely on who are going to see things differently is great.
And Luke, at what point do you start to get excited about a new built environment that you need to get task on?
I think the excitement starts right at inception, right? I mean, before you're even properly involved in it, you're getting excited because it's new, it's shiny, it's whatever the case may be. But I think the wonderful privilege of being part of the comms team is working across most of the work that CapeNature is doing, which excludes just infrastructure. It's a large machine with lots of things happening. But I think the great thing about when we're speaking about infrastructure specifically, it's understanding that there's a conservation sustainability aspect behind it. So when Ramese pulls me over to his desk and hey, I just want to touch base with you on something like that, it's so interesting for me, but also it's so valuable as the comms person to understand the little intricacies of the space, and why we've gone this route and that route, and why this is taking a little bit longer. Because at the end of the day, right, as Ramese has alluded to, the public gets a little bit impatient and why is this taking so long? And then we get flooded with inquiries and those kinds of things. And for me, having him there as the resource, and then also as the point of contact in terms of telling me why we did this, why we did that, it helps me understand the problem, helps me communicate the problem better to those out there who are asking the questions like, why has this bridge been broken for 2 years and what's going on? And I wanted to come fish and I drove 3 hours to get here and now I can't even use the damn thing. And it's like, yes, but these are the reasons why. And it's really it's the all-encompassing thing of this discussion today. It's a World Heritage Site. There's specific things we need to go through, and we need to do it right, and we need to make sure that it's resilient for the future. So communicating that message can only happen if I understand the problem, and that's where Ramese comes in and gives me that background understanding of it. Yeah,
totally. What a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much to the both of you for your time, for your insights, and for your work, doing such a phenomenal job in various parts of the storytelling of these incredible World Heritage Sites for CapeNature. And thank you for listening and watching to another episode from Season 3 of the Green Noise Podcast. We'll chat again soon.